I'm sitting in my car right now watching my entire family surrounding the building entrance, and I need to get this out before I lose my mind. Some background. I'm 29, my sister Kara is 32, and my brother Bo is 34. Growing up, I was always the odd one out. Kara got straight A's and married a guy who works in finance. Bo took over dad's business after college. Me? I dropped out of community college twice, worked retail and restaurant jobs for years, lived in my car for 3 months when I was 23, and generally didn't fit the family image. They never let me forget it. Here's what nobody knew. While they thought I was screwing around, I was working 3 jobs, taking online certification courses at night, saving every dollar I could. I got my car repossessed at 24 and bought it back 6 months later with cash. When I was living in that car, I wasn't homeless by accident. I was putting 90% of my income into savings because I refused to waste money on rent when I could shower at the gym and sleep in parking lots. They found out about the car thing, and it became family legend. The loser's son who got his car repossessed. Mom told that story at Thanksgiving for 3 straight years. By 26, I had certifications in network administration and cybersecurity. I got hired at a tech firm doing infrastructure work. Nothing glamorous, but it paid $75,000 a year with benefits. I bought a small condo. I kept my mouth shut and let them think I was still barely scraping by because, honestly, watching them pity me was easier than dealing with their judgment of whatever I did. Fast forward to last Saturday. Dad's 60th birthday dinner at this Italian place Cara picked out. The whole extended family was there. Aunts, uncles, cousins, about 30 people total. I showed up in the one decent suit I own, brought a watch I'd picked up at a department store. Nothing expensive, just something practical since Dad mentioned his old one stopped working. I thought it was a nice gesture. Dinner went fine until the gifts. Bo gave Dad some golf club set that probably cost more than my monthly car payment. Kara and her husband presented keys to a weekend trip to some resort. Then, it was my turn. I handed Dad the watch box. He opened it, looked at the watch, and his face did this thing I can't even describe. Then he held it up for everyone to see. Everyone look. The disappointment thinks a $20 department store watch erases 41 years of shame. The table went completely quiet for maybe 2 seconds before Kara jumped in. Did your pregnant girlfriend pick that out? She was looking right at me with this smile that wasn't a smile at all. See, Carly is 6 months pregnant. We told the family a month ago. That announcement went over about as well as you'd expect. Mom cried. Dad said I was making another mistake. Kara said something about how of course I'd get someone pregnant before I could afford a real apartment. Bo decided to pile on. He actually dressed up tonight. Still looks like he sleeps in his car. A few people laughed. Uncle Mike made some comment about whether this was the one who dropped out twice, and Mom just started laughing and said something about how I was caught living in the community college library when I was 20. The thing is, I wasn't living there. I'd fallen asleep studying for a certification exam and campus security found me at 2 in the morning. But the story became that I was secretly homeless and squatting in the library. Mom loved telling people that one. Then Mom raised her wine glass. To my husband, who deserved 3 children but got 2 in a permanent embarrassment, people actually clinked glasses. Dad nodded and said when people ask how many kids he has, he says 2, because explaining me takes too long. I just sat there. Carly wasn't there, thank God. She had a doctor's appointment that afternoon and was tired, so I'd gone alone. Part of me was relieved she didn't have to hear any of this. I looked around the table and every single person was either laughing or pretending they didn't hear it. Nobody spoke up. Nobody said anything. My aunt was smiling into her napkin. I stood up, put the watch box back on the table in front of Dad, and walked out. Didn't say a word. Just got up and left. Nobody followed me. Nobody called after me. I sat in my car in the parking lot for maybe 20 minutes, just staring at the steering wheel, then I drove home. Around midnight, my phone started blowing up. Mom texting about how I embarrassed Dad by leaving. Kara calling saying I made a scene and ruined the party. Bo leaving voicemails about how I can't take a joke and I'm too sensitive. I turned my phone off and went to bed. 4 a.m., someone starts pounding on my building's entrance door. I look out the window and it's all of them. Mom, Dad, Kara, Bo, even Kara's husband. They're standing outside screaming up at the building about how I need to come down and talk to them. My dad is yelling about how they didn't mean it and it was just family humor. Mom is crying, or at least making crying sounds. Kara keeps shouting about how I'm overreacting and being dramatic. Here's the thing they don't know. Remember how I said I kept quiet about my actual financial situation? Turns out that was useful. 2 years ago, Dad needed money for the business. Supply chain issues, cash flow problems, the usual. He asked me for help and I loaned him $40,000. I had him sign a promissory note because I'm not stupid. even if they think I am. The terms were flexible whenever he could pay it back. No interest because family. He's paid back maybe $3,000 total. Last year, Mom needed a new car after hers got totaled. Insurance didn't cover everything, and she was short about $12,000 for the one she wanted. I covered the difference. Another promissory note. 6 months ago, Bo's business started having problems. He needed an infusion to cover some equipment purchases and payroll. I lent him $28,000. Another promissory note, another flexible repayment schedule. I've been their backup bank for years, and they still treated me like I was the family embarrassment who couldn't get his life together. They borrowed from the son who supposedly lived in his car and couldn't hold down a job. The kicker? I did all of this specifically waiting for something like this to happen. I knew eventually they'd push too far. I knew at some point the mask would slip completely and they'd humiliate me in a way I couldn't ignore. Every loan I gave them, every time I helped out financially while they made jokes about my car getting repossessed, I was building leverage. I wasn't being generous. I was setting up dominoes. Now, they're outside my building at 4 in the morning because I haven't answered a single message and they're starting to panic. They know I walked out. They're probably realizing I'm actually angry this time, not just sulking like usual. What they don't realize yet is that I'm past angry. I've been past angry for years. I've just been waiting. I have copies of every promissory note, every text message about loans, every bank transfer receipt, and on Monday morning, I'm going to start making some calls. The loans are all legal, all documented, and all overdue, according to the original terms I built in as protection. I gave them flexible repayment schedules verbally, but the written terms say payments were due 90 days after funding. Every single loan is in default. They're still outside. Dad just tried calling again. I let it go to voicemail. Mom is texting saying, please just talk to us. Kara sent a message about how family doesn't do this to family. Bo texted that I'm being childish and I need to grow up and handle this like an adult. The thing is, I am handling it like an adult, I'm just not handling it the way they want me to. Update 1. Okay, so the Reddit hive mind told me to get a lawyer and follow through. Some of you said I was being too harsh. Most of you told me to burn it all down. I'm somewhere in the middle of those two things right now, and it's getting messier than I expected. Saturday morning after they left my building, I finally turned my phone back on. 243 missed calls. Voicemails from everyone. Text messages that started apologetic and ended threatening. Dad saying we needed to talk man to man. Mom saying I was breaking her heart. Kara saying I was being vindictive. Bo saying I better reconsider before I did something I'd regret. I ignored all of it and drove to Carly's place. She's been staying at her apartment still even though we talked about moving in together after the baby comes. When I got there around 9, she was eating cereal and watching cooking shows. I told her everything that happened at the dinner. Every word I could remember. She just sat there getting more angry as I talked. When I finished, she asked why I didn't tell her sooner. I said I didn't want to stress her out with the baby and everything. She threw a couch pillow at me and said she wasn't made of glass and I needed to stop protecting her from my family being terrible. Fair point. Then she asked what I was going to do about the loans. I told her I was calling them in, all of them, exactly like I'd planned. She wanted to know what the end game was. Did I actually want the money back or was I just trying to make a point? I told her honestly I didn't know yet. Both maybe. Sunday I spent organizing documents. Every promissory note, every bank transfer, every text message where they acknowledged the loans. I have a filing system that would make an accountant weep with joy. When you spend years planning something, you get thorough. Monday morning I called the lawyer I'd consulted 2 years ago. His name is Richard, and he specializes in contract disputes. I sent him digital copies of everything. He called me back within 2 hours and said the notes were airtight. All 3 loans were enforceable, all 3 were in default based on the 90-day terms I'd written in. He said I could demand immediate payment, and if they didn't comply, I could file suit and potentially put liens on property. That's when things got interesting. Liens on property. Dad owns the house he and Mom live in. Bo owns his house. I could actually force sales if this went far enough. Richard said it would take time and court processes, but it was possible. He suggested sending formal demand letters first, which he could draft for me. I told him to do it. The letters went out Monday afternoon via certified mail. I paid extra for tracking so I'd know exactly when they were delivered. Tuesday morning, Dad's letter was delivered at 9:42 a.m. I know because I was refreshing the tracking page. My phone started ringing at 9:55. I let it ring. He called 6 more times. Then Bo's letter arrived at his business around 11. His calls started at 11:30. Mom's letter arrived at the house at 1:20 p.m. Her calls started immediately. I didn't answer any of them. I went to work, sat through meetings, responded to support tickets, and ignored my personal phone completely. By the time I left the office at 5, I had 97 missed calls and more voicemails than I could count. That's when Dad showed up at my building. Again. Marcus at the front desk called up and said Tanner was here and seemed really agitated. I told Marcus I didn't want to see him. Marcus said he understood, but Dad was saying it was an emergency about the business. I asked Marcus if he could ask Dad to leave. Marcus said he'd try, but Dad was pretty insistent. 5 minutes later, Marcus called back. Dad had sat down in the lobby and said he wasn't leaving until I came down. Marcus asked if I wanted him to call the police for trespassing. I thought about it. Then I said no, I'd come down. Big mistake. I got off the elevator and Dad was sitting in one of the lobby chairs looking like he'd aged 10 years since Saturday. He stood up when he saw me and started walking over. I told him we could talk outside, not in my building lobby. We went out to the parking lot. It was cold and getting dark. Dad launched into this whole thing about how the demand letter was insane and I was destroying everything over hurt feelings. He said the business couldn't handle a $40,000 hit right now. They had payroll coming up, supplier payments, equipment leases. If I forced him to come up with that money immediately, he'd have to let people go. Real people with families who depended on those jobs. I asked him why that was my problem. He said because I was his son and family doesn't destroy each other. I reminded him that he told 30 people at his birthday party that he only claims to have 2 children because explaining me takes too long. He actually waved his hand like that wasn't important. Then he pivoted. He said, okay, maybe he went too far at the dinner. Maybe it was inappropriate, but I had to understand where he was coming from. He'd spent years watching me struggle and make mistakes. The dropping out, the car repossession, the girlfriend who was now pregnant when I wasn't even married. He said he and Mom had tried to guide me and I never listened. The jokes were just their way of expressing frustration. I asked if humiliating me in front of the entire extended family was expressing frustration. He said I was twisting things. It was supposed to be lighthearted family teasing. Everyone does it. Bo gets jokes about his hairline. Kara gets jokes about being controlling. It's just how the family communicates. I told him the difference was Bo and Kara's jokes were actually lighthearted, and nobody called them disappointments or said they wish they didn't exist. He started getting defensive then. He said he never said he wished I didn't exist. I reminded him Mom literally toasted to him deserving 3 children but only getting 2 plus an embarrassment. He said Mom was tipsy and didn't mean it that way. This went in circles for maybe 20 minutes. Him trying to minimize what happened, me pushing back, him getting more frustrated. Finally, he asked what it would take for me to withdraw the demand letter. I said an apology from everyone who participated in humiliating me at that dinner. A real one. Not a sorry you felt that way apology. He said he'd apologize right now. I told him that wasn't enough. I wanted Mom, Kara, Bo, and Uncle Mike to all apologize, in writing, acknowledging specifically what they said and why it was wrong. And I wanted it before the 15-day deadline in the demand letter. Dad asked what happened to the repayment demand if they apologized. I said the loans were still due, but I'd work out a real payment plan if they could manage to apologize like adults. He looked at me like I'd sprouted a second head. Then he said he'd talk to everyone and see what he could do. Wednesday, nothing. No calls, no texts, no visits. Radio silence from the entire family. Carly asked if I thought they were actually discussing apologies or planning something else. I said probably something else. Thursday morning, Kara showed up at my office. I don't know how she got past building security, but she did. She appeared at my cubicle at 10 a.m. like a corporate ghost. She said we needed to talk and she wasn't leaving until I heard her out. I couldn't exactly make a scene at work, so I took her to one of the empty conference rooms on my floor. She closed the door and immediately started in about how I was tearing the family apart. Not about the dinner, about the loans. She said Dad was having panic attacks about losing the business. Bo's wife, Ann, was apparently making his life miserable because they might lose their house. Mom was devastated that I wouldn't answer her calls. I asked Kara why she was here instead of any of them. She said because they sent her to be the reasonable one. I almost laughed. I asked her what made her think she was reasonable, given that she made the pregnant girlfriend comment at the dinner. She said that was just surprise because I hadn't mentioned Carly was pregnant until a month ago, and it was kind of shocking. I reminded her that, yes, I had told them a month ago at a family brunch, and the response was Mom crying and Dad saying I was making another mistake. Kara said they were just worried about whether I was ready for a kid. I asked her why it was any of their business. She said because they care about me. That's when I kind of lost it. I asked her if caring about me included calling my gift a disappointment's attempt to erase 41 years of shame. I asked if caring about me included the pregnant girlfriend comment. I asked if caring about me included joining in when everyone else was making jokes about my failures. She went quiet for a minute. Then she said she was caught up in the moment and it wasn't meant to be that serious. I told her that was a garbage excuse. She got defensive and said I was being overdramatic about family banter. I asked her how she'd feel if at her anniversary party, I stood up and said her husband only married her because he needed someone controlling to organize his life, and she was desperate enough to say yes. She said that would be completely different and out of line. I asked her how exactly it was different from what happened to me. She didn't have an answer for that. Then she switched tactics. She said, okay, fine, everyone messed up at the dinner. But was I really willing to destroy Dad's business and Beau's financial stability over it? Real consequences for real people because my feelings got hurt? I told her my feelings didn't get hurt. My family revealed how they actually see me, and I was responding appropriately. She asked what appropriately meant. I said it meant they borrowed money from someone they openly mock, and now they have to pay it back according to the terms they signed. She said I was being cruel. I said I was being a creditor. She said I was being vindictive. I said she was probably right about that. Kara left after threatening to talk to a lawyer herself about the promissory notes. I told her to go ahead. Richard had already confirmed they were solid. Friday afternoon, Beau showed up at the gym I go to. Yeah, the gym. Apparently, Mom told him where I work out because of course she did. I was on the treadmill when he appeared next to me. He asked if we could talk. I said no. He stood there for a minute, then asked when I'd become such a jerk. I turned up my music and kept running. He eventually left. Friday night, Carly and I were at the grocery store getting food for the week when we ran into Mom. Completely by accident. Or maybe not, given that it's the store closest to my building and Mom knows that. She was in the produce section when we came around the corner. She saw me, and her whole face did this thing like she might cry. She walked over and completely ignored me, started talking directly to Carly about how beautiful she looked and how far along was she now and had they found out if it was a boy or girl yet. Carly, to her credit, was polite but brief. Said we were having a girl, she was due in 3 months, everything was fine. Mom got this weird smile and said she hoped she'd get to meet her granddaughter someday. Then she looked at me. I started to push the cart past her. Mom grabbed my arm. Not hard, just enough to stop me. She said I was killing Dad with this loan thing. He hadn't slept in days. The business was in trouble. Employees might lose their jobs right before the holidays. All because I couldn't take a joke and move on like an adult. Carly stepped in before I could respond. She asked Mom if she'd actually listened to what she just said. That maybe the problem wasn't Calvin not being able to take a joke, but the family thinking cruelty was funny. Mom said Carly didn't understand family dynamics. Carly said she understood that Calvin's family borrowed $80,000 from him while treating him like garbage and now didn't want to face consequences. Mom's face went red. She said Carly had no right to talk about family business. Carly said she was about to be family whether Mom liked it or not. Mom said over her dead body, was she acknowledging a grandchild from this situation? I physically moved between them and told Mom this conversation was over. She started crying right there in the produce section. I pushed the cart away and we left. That night I got a text from an unknown number. It said, "This is Anne, Beau's wife. We need to talk about what you're doing to my family." I didn't respond. She called an hour later. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail saying I was destroying her kid's stability and if I had any conscience I'd reconsider. I deleted it. Saturday morning, Uncle Mike called. I actually answered because I was curious what he'd say. He launched into this lecture about family loyalty and how I was being disrespectful to my elders, and back in his day, this kind of behavior would have gotten me disowned. I asked him if back in his day it was okay to mock someone at their parents' birthday party. He said I was too sensitive and needed thicker skin. I hung up. The 15-day deadline is in 9 days. Nobody has apologized. Nobody has attempted to pay back a single dollar. What they have done is send various family members to pressure me, shown up at my work and gym, tried to manipulate Carly, and generally acted like I'm the villain here. Carly asked me this morning if I was actually going to follow through when the deadline hits. I told her absolutely. She asked if I was scared of permanently destroying these relationships. I said the relationships were already destroyed. I just didn't realize it until they said it out loud at a birthday dinner. Richard called yesterday to check in. He asked if I'd received any payment or communication about payment. I said no. He asked if I wanted him to prepare the next steps for when the deadline passes. I said yes. He's drafting a lawsuit for breach of contract and preparing paperwork to potentially put liens on both properties if they don't settle. 9 days left. Let's see if anyone figures out I'm serious before then. Update 2. 4 days until the deadline and everything has gotten significantly worse in ways I didn't anticipate. Sunday after I posted the last update, Carly started getting messages. Not from my family directly, but from her own mother. Apparently, Mom found Carly's parents on social media and reached out to them. Sent them this long message about how their daughter was caught in the middle of a family dispute, and maybe they could talk some sense into her about convincing me to back down. Carly's mom called her Sunday evening asking what was going on. Carly had to explain the entire situation, which she wasn't thrilled about because she'd been keeping my family drama separate from her own family. Her mom asked if I was really going to sue my own father and brother. Carly said yes. Her mom said that seemed extreme and maybe there was a better way to handle this. Carly told her mom to stay out of it. Monday morning, Carly's dad called me directly. I don't even know how he got my number. He introduced himself, said he wanted to understand the situation from my perspective. I gave him the basic rundown of the birthday dinner and the loans. He listened quietly, then asked if financial revenge was really the answer. I asked him what he'd do if his family humiliated him publicly and owed him 80 grand. He said he'd probably be angry too, but family was family. I thanked him for his input and ended the call. Carly was furious when I told her. She called her parents back and apparently there was a whole argument about boundaries and them inserting themselves where they didn't belong. Her mom said they were just trying to help. Carly said helping would be supporting her, not taking my family's side. That's still ongoing. Monday afternoon at work, my manager pulled me into his office. His name is Dennis, and we've always had a decent working relationship. He closed the door and asked if everything was okay with me lately. I said yes, why? He said he'd received a call from someone claiming to be my father who was concerned about my well-being and wanted to know if I'd been acting strangely at work. I just stared at him. Dad had actually called my workplace to try to make me look unstable. Dennis said he told Dad that he couldn't discuss employee matters with anyone and ended the call. But he wanted to check with me if there was anything going on I needed to talk about. I gave him a very abbreviated version, just said there was a family dispute over some loans and things were tense. Dennis said, okay. He wouldn't pry, but if I needed any time off to handle personal matters, I should let him know. I thanked him and went back to my desk. That's when I realized how far they were willing to go. They weren't just trying to pressure me directly anymore. They were trying to undermine my stability everywhere else. My job, Carly's family, anywhere they could reach. Tuesday morning, Richard called with an update. He said he'd received a call from an attorney representing Dad and Beau. They wanted to negotiate. Richard asked if I was interested in hearing their proposal. I said sure. The proposal was essentially this. They'd acknowledge the loans were valid, but dispute the 90-day payment terms, claiming they were unconscionable, and I'd verbally agreed to flexible repayment. They wanted to restructure everything into a 10-year payment plan with minimal interest. They'd pay me back $300 a month per loan until it was settled. I did the math. $300 per month for $40,000 would take over 11 years, not 10. And that was assuming no missed payments. I told Richard absolutely not. He asked what my counteroffer was. I said full repayment within 90 days or we file suit. He said he'd communicate that. Tuesday evening, Kara showed up at my condo again. This time, Marcus called up first to ask if I wanted him to send her away. I said let her come up because I was curious what new tactic she'd try. She arrived at my door holding a folder. I let her in, and she sat on my couch uninvited. She opened the folder and pulled out financial documents. Dad's business documents? She started showing me profit and loss statements, cash flow reports, accounts payable lists. She said the business was barely breaking even. The $40,000 I was demanding would literally shut them down. 12 employees would lose their jobs. I asked her why I should care. She said because those were real people with families. I reminded her I was also a real person with a family who she'd mocked at a birthday dinner. She said she'd already tried to apologize. I asked when, because I hadn't heard anything. She said she'd been trying, but I wouldn't answer calls or texts. I told her to say it now then. She said okay. She was sorry for the pregnant girlfriend comment. It was inappropriate and she regretted it. I asked if she regretted it because it was wrong or because I was calling in loans. She got quiet. Then she said both could be true. I told her to leave. She didn't leave. She said we needed to talk about Mom's loan too. I said Mom wasn't part of this negotiation. Kara said Mom's car loan was different because Mom didn't have any income. She was fully dependent on Dad. If I forced Mom to pay back $12,000, it would come from Dad anyway. And he didn't have it. I said that sounded like a dad problem. Kara asked when I'd become so cold. I asked her when she'd become so entitled that she thought borrowing money meant never having to pay it back. She said family loans were different than regular loans. I said not when they're documented with promissory notes. She said I was hiding behind legality to avoid dealing with the real issue, which was that I was angry and taking it out on everyone financially. I told her she was absolutely right about that and it didn't change anything. She left after saying I'd regret this. I asked what that meant. She said I'd regret destroying relationships over money. I said I'd regret letting people treat me like garbage more. Wednesday, I had a baby appointment with Carly. Just a routine checkup, everything was fine with the pregnancy. While we were in the waiting room, my phone started blowing up with texts from Bo. He was saying I needed to call him immediately. It was an emergency. It was about the loans. I ignored them. The texts kept coming. By the time we left the doctor's office 45 minutes later, I had 18 messages from him. I called him from the parking lot. He answered on the first ring and launched into this frantic explanation about how his business partner had found out about the loan situation. Apparently, Bo's business partner, who I'd never met, was now threatening to dissolve their partnership because Bo had taken a loan without telling him, and it was creating liability issues for the company. I asked Bo why that was my problem. He said because if the partnership dissolved, he'd lose everything. The business was jointly owned. His partner could force a buyout he couldn't afford. I asked him again why that was my problem. He started yelling about how I was destroying his entire life over a birthday dinner. I hung up. Carly asked if I was okay. I said yeah. She said I didn't look okay. I admitted that this was getting bigger than I'd planned. She asked if I wanted to back down. I said no. She asked if I was sure. I said I'd never been more sure of anything. Wednesday night, Anne sent me a Facebook message, a long one. She said she understood I was hurt by what happened at the dinner, but I needed to think about the bigger picture. Bo's kids, her stepchildren from his first marriage, were asking why their dad was so stressed. The 11-year-old had asked if they were going to lose their house. She was begging me to consider the collateral damage of my actions. I didn't respond. Carly read it over my shoulder and said Anne was manipulating me. I said I knew. She asked why Anne's kids' stability was supposed to matter more than my dignity. I didn't have an answer for that except that it wasn't supposed to, and I wasn't going to pretend it did. Thursday morning, Mom showed up at my office building. Security called up and said Eileen was in the lobby and seemed very upset. I told them I wasn't available. They called back 10 minutes later saying she was refusing to leave and was now crying in the lobby and it was causing a disturbance. I went down. Mom was sitting in one of the lobby chairs with tissues, crying loudly enough that people were staring. When she saw me, she stood up and tried to hug me. I stepped back. She said we needed to talk about the car loan. I said I'd already explained the terms in the demand letter. She said she couldn't pay $12,000. Didn't I understand that? I said she should have thought about that before borrowing it. She started this whole speech about how she was my mother and she'd raised me and sacrificed for me. And this was how I was repaying her. I asked what sacrifices specifically. She said she'd fed me, clothed me, put a roof over my head. I said that was literally the baseline legal requirement for having a child. She said I was being cruel and disrespectful. I said she'd called me a permanent embarrassment in front of 30 people. She said that wasn't what she meant. I asked her what she meant then. She said it was just frustration coming out after years of watching me struggle. I asked why my struggles were frustrating to her. She said because she wanted better for me. I asked if she wanted better for me or if she was embarrassed by me. She didn't answer that. Then she switched tactics completely. She said Dad was talking about selling the house. I said okay. She said they'd lived there for 32 years. All of us kids grew up there. Our memories were there. If they had to sell it because of my loan demands, could I live with that? I said if she was trying to make me feel guilty about them having to liquidate assets to pay back money they legally owed me, it wasn't working. She started crying harder, said I'd changed. I wasn't the son she raised. I told her maybe I was exactly the son she raised. Just one who finally had enough resources to stop accepting mistreatment. She left after that. Thursday afternoon, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I answered because at this point I was curious who else they'd drag into this. It was Bo's ex-wife, the mother of his kids. She said Anne had contacted her about the loan situation and she wanted me to know that if Bo lost his house, it would affect his custody arrangement and his ability to have the kids overnight. I asked her if she was actually concerned about that or if Anne had put her up to calling me. She got defensive and said it was a legitimate concern. I said I didn't have kids with Bo, so his custody arrangements weren't my responsibility. She called me selfish and hung up. Friday, Richard called with another update. The attorney representing Dad and Bo had sent a formal response to my counteroffer. They were now claiming that the promissory notes were signed under duress because their clients were in desperate financial situations when they asked for the loans. They were threatening to countersue for unconscionable lending practices if I proceeded with collections. Richard said this was nonsense legally. There was no duress. They'd approached me asking for money. I'd given it with clear terms they'd signed willingly. But it meant if I filed suit, they'd file a countersuit, and things would get ugly and expensive. He asked if I wanted to reconsider settling. I asked what he thought I should do. He said from a purely legal standpoint I'd win, but it would cost time and money and relationships. He said from a personal standpoint that was my call to make. I told him to prepare the lawsuit. Filing deadline was Monday if they didn't pay by then. He said he'd have everything ready. Friday night, Carly and I were at her apartment when someone knocked on the door. It was Kara and her husband Preston. They'd apparently figured out where Carly lived. Carly didn't let them in. They stood in the hallway, and Preston did most of the talking. He said they wanted to present a compromise. What if Dad and Bo paid back half of what they owed over the next 3 years? The other half would be forgiven as family goodwill. In exchange, I'd drop the legal demands and we'd all try to repair relationships. I asked what about Mom's loan. Preston said Mom's loan would be forgiven entirely given her financial situation. I said no to all of it. Kara said I was being unreasonable. I said they'd had 15 days to come up with something reasonable, and they'd spent that time trying to manipulate, pressure, and intimidate me instead. Preston said there were always two sides to every conflict. I said sure. And in this one side borrowed money and the other side wanted it back per the signed agreement. Not complicated. They left after Kara said I'd destroyed this family. Carly closed the door and locked it. She asked if I was really okay with how far this was going. I said I was. She said she'd support whatever I decided, but she wanted to make sure I'd thought through all the consequences. I told her I'd been thinking through these consequences for 2 years. This was always how it was going to end if they pushed me far enough. They'd pushed. It's Saturday now. 3 days until the Monday deadline. Nobody has paid anything. Nobody has given me a genuine apology. What they have done is weaponize guilt, drag in extended family and Carly's family, threaten my employment, threaten countersuits, and try every manipulation tactic they can think of. Richard is filing the lawsuit Monday morning if I give him the go-ahead. Liens will follow if they don't settle. Dad might lose the house. Bo might lose his house and his business partnership. Mom will have a judgment against her she can't pay. And the thing is, I still don't feel bad about any of it. Reddit told me I was justified. Some of you said I should take the nuclear option. I'm about to. We'll see what happens when they realize I actually meant everything I said. Final update. Monday morning came, and I woke up knowing exactly what was going to happen. The 15-day deadline expired at midnight Sunday. Nobody had paid anything. Nobody had even attempted to make a partial payment. At 8 a.m., I called Richard and told him to file everything. He said the paperwork was ready to go. He'd file the breach of contract suits against Dad, Mom, and Bo by noon. He asked one more time if I was absolutely certain. I said yes. He said okay, and he'd call me when it was done. I went to work like it was a normal day. Answered emails, worked on a server upgrade project, went to a team meeting about network security. Around 11:30, my phone started ringing. Dad first, then Bo, then Kara, then Mom. I silenced my phone and left it in my desk drawer. Richard called at 1:15 to confirm everything was filed. 3 separate lawsuits. Dad for $40,000 plus interest and legal fees. Mom for $12,000 plus interest and legal fees. Bo for $28,000 plus interest and legal fees. He said they'd be served within 72 hours. I thanked him and went back to work. My phone had 63 missed calls by the time I checked it at 3 p.m. I didn't listen to any of the voicemails. I texted Carly to let her know it was done. She sent back a heart emoji and told me she was proud of me for following through. I left work at 5 and drove straight to Carly's apartment. When I got there, she was making dinner. She asked how I was feeling. I told her honestly I felt vindicated. She said good, because I should. We ate pasta and watched some cooking competition show and didn't talk about my family at all. Around 8 p.m., someone started pounding on Carly's apartment door. I looked through the peephole, and it was all of them. Dad, Mom, Kara, Bo, standing in the hallway outside Carly's apartment. Dad was yelling through the door about how I needed to come out and talk to them like a man. Carly called building security. They came up within 5 minutes and told my family they needed to leave or they'd call the police. Dad tried arguing that this was a family emergency. Security said they didn't care. It was private property and the residents didn't want them there. They eventually left. My phone rang immediately after. Dad calling. I answered this time. He asked why I was hiding behind lawyers instead of talking to him. I said we'd talked plenty. He said filing lawsuits was insane, and he wanted to know what I actually wanted from this. I told him I wanted exactly what the lawsuit said. Full repayment with interest and legal fees. He said that was impossible. I said that was his problem. He started yelling about how I was destroying the family. I told him he'd destroyed the family when he humiliated me at his birthday dinner. He said that kept coming back to hurt feelings over a joke. I said maybe he should have taken my feelings seriously the first time. I hung up. Tuesday morning, I got served at work. Bo's attorney had filed a countersuit claiming unconscionable lending practices and financial elder abuse against Mom. The complaint was 30 pages of complete nonsense about how I'd taken advantage of vulnerable family members during financial crises. Richard called me after he got his copy and said it was a joke legally, but we'd have to respond to it. I asked how much this was going to cost me. He said with the countersuit, probably another 8 to 10,000 in legal fees before we got to any kind of resolution. I told him to do whatever needed to be done. Tuesday afternoon, Kara showed up at my building again. Marcus called up and I told him to let her come up because I was tired of them ambushing me everywhere else. She knocked on my door and I let her in. She didn't sit down this time, just stood in my entryway and asked what it would take for me to drop the lawsuits. I asked what they were offering. She said Dad would commit to paying $500 a month toward his loan. Bo would pay $300 a month. Mom's loan would be forgiven. In exchange, I'd dismiss everything and we'd try to move forward as a family. I did the math out loud. $500 a month for $40,000 was 80 months. Almost 7 years. $300 a month for $28,000 was 93 months. Almost 8 years. And they wanted me to just write off $12,000 to Mom for nothing. I asked Kara if she actually thought that was reasonable. She said it was better than destroying everyone financially. I asked her when paying back money you borrowed became financial destruction. She said I was being deliberately obtuse. Then she tried a different angle. She said the lawsuits were going to cost me money too. Legal fees, time, stress. Was it really worth it just to prove a point? I told her it absolutely was. She asked why I was so intent on burning everything down. I asked her why she participated in humiliating me at a birthday dinner and then expected me to just absorb it and move on. She said she'd already apologized. I reminded her that her apology was conditional and came after I started calling in loans. She said I was impossible to talk to. I asked her if she wanted to know why I was really doing this. She said obviously, so I told her. I explained that for years I'd watched them treat me like I was less than. Every family gathering, every holiday, every casual interaction was peppered with little comments about my failures. The car repossession story, the community college dropout story, the living in my car story. They'd built this entire narrative about who I was, and they performed it for anyone who would listen. I was the family's screw-up, the disappointment, the one who couldn't get his life together. And the thing was, while they were doing that, I was working my tail off to build something. I was saving money, getting certifications, building a career. I was becoming financially stable and even successful by most measures. But I never told them because I realized something important. Their perception of me as a failure gave me power. It meant they underestimated me. It meant when they needed money, they came to me, borrowed it, and figured I'd never actually enforce repayment because I was too weak or too desperate for family approval. I'd been planning this for 2 years. Every loan I gave them, I did it, knowing that eventually there would be a moment where they'd cross a line they couldn't walk back from. And I'd be ready. I had documentation. I had legal standing. I had resources they didn't know I had. The birthday dinner wasn't the beginning of my anger. It was just the trigger I'd been waiting for to execute something I'd been building toward for years. Kara just stared at me. Then she asked if I'd really been that calculated about it. I said yes. She said that was actually frightening. I said good, maybe they'd take me seriously now. She left without saying anything else. Wednesday, Richard called with an update. He'd filed a motion to dismiss Bo's countersuit as frivolous. The hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, he'd also filed preliminary motions to place liens on Dad's house and Bo's house pending resolution of the breach of contract suits. He said the liens wouldn't force immediate sale, but they'd prevent them from selling or refinancing without paying off the judgments first. I asked what the timeline looked like for actual judgments. He said probably 4 to 6 months if they kept fighting it, or we could push for settlement negotiations. I told him to push for full repayment and not to settle for anything less. Wednesday evening, Dad showed up at my office building parking lot. He was waiting by my car when I left work. I saw him from across the lot and almost turned around to go back inside. But I decided to just deal with it. He looked terrible, like he hadn't slept in days. He asked if we could talk. I said we could talk right there. He said everything I was doing was going to destroy the business. Real employees were going to lose their jobs. I asked him how many employees he had. He said 12. I asked him how much the business was worth. He said that wasn't relevant. I said it was completely relevant because if the business was worth anything, he could get a loan to pay me back. He said no bank would give him a loan right now with the liens and lawsuits pending. I asked him why that was my problem. He said because I was his son and family was supposed to help each other. I asked him where that logic was when he was calling me a disappointment in front of 30 people. He said we'd been over this. It was a joke that went too far. I asked him if he'd actually listened to what he said that night. Did he remember the specific words? He said he remembered saying some things he shouldn't have. I repeated them back to him. Everyone look. The disappointment thinks a $20 watch erases 41 years of shame. When people ask how many kids I have, I say 2 because explaining you takes too long. I asked him if those sounded like jokes to him. He said when I repeated them like that, they sounded worse than he remembered. I said maybe that was the point. He said he didn't mean them the way they sounded. I asked him how he meant them then. He started trying to explain that it was just frustration about watching me struggle for years, about the car repossession, and the dropping out and the jobs that didn't seem to go anywhere. He said he and mom had expectations for their kids and I hadn't met them, and it was difficult to watch. I asked him if his disappointment in me justified public humiliation. He said no, but it explained where it came from. I told him I didn't care where it came from. I cared that it happened and nobody thought I deserved an apology until I had leverage. He said that wasn't true. They would have apologized eventually. I asked when. He didn't have an answer. I told him the lawsuits were going forward and I wasn't backing down. He said I was making a huge mistake. I got in my car and left. Thursday, Bo showed up at the gym again. This time, he didn't try to talk to me while I was working out. He waited in the parking lot. When I came out, he was leaning against my car. He said his business partner had filed dissolution papers. The partnership was ending. He was going to have to buy out his partner's half or sell his half, and he couldn't afford either option with the lawsuit and liens hanging over him. I asked him what he wanted me to do about that. He said I could drop the lawsuit and accept a payment plan. I said I'd already rejected their payment plan offer. He said I was being unreasonable. I asked him if he thought borrowing $28,000 and not paying any of it back for 6 months was reasonable. He said he'd been planning to pay it back when the business stabilized. I said his business problems weren't my responsibility. He asked me when I'd become so heartless. I told him I'd learned from watching him and Kara and our parents treat people they supposedly loved like garbage when it was convenient. He said that was unfair. I said piling onto Dad's disappointment speech at the birthday dinner was unfair. He said he was just making a joke about my suit. I said his joke was about how I looked like I still slept in my car. That wasn't about my suit. That was about kicking me when I was already down for entertainment. Bo said I was holding on to grudges and it was making me bitter. I said I was holding people accountable and it was making me clear-eyed about who my family actually was. He said I was going to regret this when I had no family left. I said I'd regret staying connected to people who only valued me when I was useful more. He walked away. Friday, Mom tried a different approach. She sent me a long text message instead of calling or showing up. The message said she'd been thinking a lot about the birthday dinner and she understood now that what she'd said was hurtful. She said she'd been drinking and got caught up in the moment and didn't think about how the words would sound to me. She said she loved me and she was proud of me for building a life for myself, even if she didn't always show it well. She said the lawsuit against her was going to force them to refinance the house and they might not qualify. She asked if I could please reconsider just her loan since she didn't have any income of her own. I read it 3 times. Then I showed it to Carly. She asked if it sounded like a real apology to me. I said parts of it did, but the ending undermined everything else. Carly said exactly. It was an apology designed to get me to drop the lawsuit, not an apology because she actually understood what she'd done wrong. I didn't respond to the text. Saturday, Richard called to tell me Dad's attorney had reached out about settlement. They wanted to know if I'd accept $30,000 immediately for Dad's loan and forgive the rest, $20,000 immediately for Bo's loan and forgive the rest, drop Mom's lawsuit entirely. I asked where they'd suddenly get $50,000. Richard said probably from refinancing the house or liquidating business assets. I told Richard to tell them I wanted full repayment plus interest and legal fees or we'd see them in court. He asked if I was sure because $50,000 immediately was significant. I said I didn't care. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about them understanding that there were actual consequences for how they treated people. Richard said, okay. He'd communicate that. Sunday, Carly and I went to look at baby furniture. We're planning to move in together before the baby comes and we needed to start setting up a nursery. While we were at the store, I got a text from an unknown number. The message said, "This is Anne. I know you're not talking to Bo, but his kids are really suffering from all this stress and I thought you should know what you're putting children through." I blocked the number. Later that afternoon, Carly asked me if I'd thought about what happens after all this. When the lawsuits were settled and I'd gotten my money back or whatever ended up happening, would I ever talk to my family again? I told her honestly I didn't know. Maybe not. She asked if I was okay with that. I said I was more okay with it than pretending like nothing happened and going back to being their emotional punching bag. She said she supported whatever I decided, but she wanted me to know that our daughter was never going to be around people who treated me that way. I wouldn't let her grow up watching her grandparents and aunt and uncle mock her father and thinking that was normal family behavior. I told her I agreed completely. She said good, because she was serious about it. If I wanted to eventually reconcile with them, it would only happen if they fundamentally changed how they treated me, and she didn't see that happening. Monday morning, exactly 1 week after the lawsuit filing, I got a call from Dad. He said they'd gotten an attorney consultation and been told the promissory notes were solid, and they'd most likely lose if this went to trial. Their attorney had advised them to settle. He asked what my bottom line actually was. I told him full repayment of all 3 loans with the interest specified in the notes, plus my legal fees to date. That came to roughly $87,000 total. He said that was impossible to come up with. I said then we'd go to trial and the judgments would include even more legal fees and potential property liens that could force sales. He asked if I was really willing to take their house. I said if that's what it took to get repaid, yes. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he never thought I'd actually do this. He thought I'd back down eventually because family was supposed to mean something. I told him family did mean something. It meant not publicly humiliating someone and then acting shocked when they responded. It meant respecting someone enough not to borrow money from them while mocking their life choices. It meant treating people with basic dignity, even when they didn't fit your expectations. Dad said he'd failed at that. I said yes, he had. He asked if there was any path forward where we could repair this. I said maybe someday, but not while he was still trying to avoid accountability. Not while he was still acting like the lawsuits were the problem, instead of his behavior being the problem. He said he'd talk to his attorney about settlement options and hung up. It's Tuesday now, 3 weeks since the birthday dinner. The lawsuits are moving forward. The liens are being processed. My family has tried every manipulation tactic they can think of, and none of them have worked.